we started to hear this strange noise, a noise we had never heard before. It's hard to compare the noise to anything. To give you an idea how loud this thing was, it didn't come into my view for about 5 total minutes. The lights on the outside of the garage, I could see down into the cornfield. I couldn't tell what it was. You know, if you look at a lobster, how they have like those long like whisker things coming out, he had a couple of those too. And when he got into my garage, we have 4 or 5 exposed light bulbs that were pretty bright. It must have scared him, or he lost control, and he just started slamming up and down into the ceiling of my garage. Instantly, we knew something was wrong, and we ran right into the house, because as soon as he started hitting the ceiling, you could hear that this thing had weight behind it. So you could hear the force of it just crashing into the ceiling. So we ran into the house. I was scared to open the garage door again, but I should have opened the garage door, and I should have closed. I should have tried to trap this thing in my garage just to show someone, or to capture it somehow. But I was only like 22 at the time when this happened. Just with everything that was going on, I was just a little scrambled, and it just didn't run my mind until the next day.
Man, Tommy, you've got a story unlike any I've ever heard before. This isn't a Bigfoot story. Let's just get right into it, man. I'm ready to talk about this. I have never, ever heard of anything. I'm sitting here trying to think of anybody that I've talked to that has told me something like this, but I'm just drawing up a blank. I've never heard anything like this. So if you don't mind, just start back over from the top and tell us what happened.
Okay. About 15 years ago, I was hanging out with he was my best friend at the time. His name was Steve. We were listening to music in my garage, and, we were listening to music during the day. It was later in the evening, so the sun was starting to go down, and after the sun had pretty much completely set and it was dark, we started to hear this strange noise, a noise we had never heard before. It's hard to compare the noise to anything. I guess now, knowing what I know, it would be some type of wings or a flapping sound. And give you an idea how loud this thing was, it didn't come into my view for about 5 total minutes. So the lights on the outside of the garage, I could see down into the cornfield that was across the road, and I could see that whatever was making the noise was flying in a straight line to my garage, and I couldn't tell what it was. I knew it wasn't an owl or a bird or anything like that, because it was like it was on a string, because it stayed in one straight line all the way. He never bobbed to the left or right or up or down. He stayed right where he was, and he flew up. And by the time he had got to my garage, me and my friend had both realized that it was an insect of some type, but a very large insect. He was about the size of a regular NFL football. He was actually probably just a little bit bigger than that, if we're excluding his wings and his little legs or appendages that were hanging off of his body. And he had like a design on his body. Like I said, I'll do my best to draw you a picture of the design. He had like a rings or stripes that went around like his abdomen or thorax. But his eyes were black. They were a little bit bigger than a marble. Another thing I forgot to mention too, like, you know, if you look at a lobster, how they have like those long like whisker things coming out.
Yeah.
He had a couple of those too. When he got into my garage, we have 4 or 5 exposed light bulbs that were pretty bright. He just it must have scared him, or he lost control, and he just started slamming up and down into the ceiling of my garage. And instantly we knew something was wrong, and we ran right into the house, because as soon as he started hitting the ceiling, you could hear that this thing had weight behind it. So you could hear the force of it just crashing into the ceiling. So we ran into the house. You know, we talked about it for a few moments. His mother called him and, you know, said she was passing my road, and if he wanted to ride home, you know, he better be ready and, you know, come out. And so when he went out and got in his mother's truck, his mom said, hey, and I forgot to mention, when we went inside, I turned off the garage lights. So now it's pitch black outside. So when she pulled up in her truck and my friend had gotten in the truck, now they were watching this thing in the headlights, and it was just flying around. And his mom made a comment like, oh, wow, that's, you know, what's that weird bird flying around in, you know, Tommy's garage? And my friend tried to explain to her that it was some type of bug. They left. And then shortly after, I'd say 20 to 30 minutes, no longer, one of my other friends, Dustin, had stopped over, and I walked out my front door and I got into his truck, and it was the same situations. The lights were still off. So now I'm looking at this thing through the headlights, and it's, you know, it's some type of massive moth or some type of strange insect that we've never seen before, never seen since. And it was flying around and going crazy. My friend Dustin only, you know, we only sat out there for maybe 5 or 10 minutes, and we talked about it, and he had to go home. So he left and scared of the thing. So I ran into my front door, and that's basically, you know, the whole story. It's a short one. And, like I said to you earlier, my only regret was just because I wasn't thinking straight at this moment. I should have opened. I was scared to open the garage door again, but I should have opened the garage door, and I should have closed. I should have tried to trap this thing in my garage, just to show someone, you know, or to capture it somehow. But you know, I was only like 22 at the time when this happened. So idiot, you know, young man, and just with everything that was going on, I was just a little scrambled, and it just didn't run my mind until the next day.
People that know me know that this may be kind of silly. I have a slight, not a phobia, but I'm afraid of birds. Like I don't like to be like close to birds, and it's all based on. There's been a few times a bird has like gotten inside my home and been freaking out, flying around, slamming into stuff. And that has just always freaked me out. And what you're describing is like drumming up those feelings of fear. I would have been freaking out, dude. I mean, we were talking about it. I'm in Oklahoma. Our climate down here, a little bit warmer than where you're at, typically. And we've got a lot of bugs. We've got some really big bugs. But nothing anywhere close to what you're describing, the size of what you're describing.
Yeah, and I think it's worth mentioning too that he didn't fly very fast either. This was well, until he got into the garage. When he got into the light, he sped up quite a bit. But this was in like the first, I want to say the first 2 weeks of October. So you weren't in upstate New York. You're not seeing bugs flying around in October. You're really not. I mean, maybe like some of the leftover like ladybugs and the wood bugs and crap, but yeah, nothing like this. And like I said, I also, I used the internet and a couple books. I, looked at the biggest insects around. I checked all the surrounding states, and nothing even, close.
The best you can, kind of give a detailed description of what it looked like, as much as you were able to see. You were talking about the legs hanging down and stuff like that. Like, what were the wings shaped like? Things like that.
Okay. His wings were kind of flapping really fast. It's like, so that was probably the part I didn't get the greatest look at. So the legs that were hanging, have you ever seen like a picture of like a blown up flea?
Yeah.
Or something like that? It looked like that. Like, it looked like those type of legs. And its body was either light brown or a grayish color, and he had like rings around his body. He had like these it was the same color, but it was like a different shade. So he had some type of pattern or design on him. His eyes were all black. They were not like the size of a typical marble, but like a bigger one, like a good size marble.
Yeah.
And then he had kind of like those weird, I don't know if they're called whispers, but like if you're looking at like a crab or I think a lobster, actually, they have those whisper things. He had like a couple of those. They were gray too, that matched the rest of his body.
Did it look like just a typical moth except larger?
It's so hard to describe. Because when you think of a moth, you think that like they're just kind of flat. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it wasn't flat. It was like it was rounded and fat somehow. Like it was more so. Picture like a moth, but in the shape of like one of those fuzzy bumblebees.
Yeah, I was getting ready to say. So its body was shaped more like a bee type insect.
Yeah, and just the size of it, we couldn't tell what type of insect it was. We both instantly ran in the house, and because I was like, we were both thinking like this thing could either like suck your blood, or even if it couldn't, if it bit you, it looked like it would hurt a lot.
Yeah. I mean, if it's a biting insect or a stinging insect that size, ain't no way, man. I'm not hanging around to find out. You were talking about whenever it was like flapping around and like hitting the ceiling and stuff, like dust was falling off of it.
Yeah, so I don't know if and that's where I came up with these little theories of possibly where it came from.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, we could hear it for 5 minutes before it came into view. So it must have come from the forest, or the tree line past the cornfield that was across from my house. So when he got up to the garage, he was banging on the ceiling of my garage, and there was I don't know if it was a brownish grayish color, but just for the first I don't know if it continued to happen, but what we saw when he was hitting the ceiling, there was debris, like dust, just raining off of him.
Yeah, like moths have like that dust on their wings. I wonder if it could have been that, or if it was like dirt or something.
And the only theory, like when me and my friend went inside, like we were, what the heck was that? And the only two theories I could think was like, is this some thing that's been burrowed in the ground for God only knows how long? And, and I don't know why it would choose a cold time like October to come up, or maybe maybe it didn't come up on its own, or maybe the tree it was in, or I thought maybe another theory was it could have lived inside of a tree. And maybe that tree just got like really old and decayed, and it had to fly out. But when it flew out, it saw all the lights at my house, and it just made a straight line right for the lights.
I saw an article today, as a matter of fact, that was talking about some cicada that hasn't been seen since some crazy amount of time, because like certain insects, especially cicadas, will like be buried underground basically, and they'll come up. Like, I think here in Oklahoma, we have one that comes up every 7 years out of the ground or something crazy like that. So, I mean, your theory about like it possibly being something that was burrowed underground for a long time and just came up, I mean, that's definitely a possibility. You've obviously never heard anybody else in your area talk about anything like this before.
Oh yeah, no. And everybody I told, like, a couple of my close friends believe me, but basically everyone laughs at me when I tell them. They just, they laughed.
This happened, you originally told me, what, 15 years ago about?
Yeah, about 15 to 16 years ago. I want probably closer to 15 years ago.
I assume in that amount of time you've, scoured the internet and everything trying to figure out what this thing was.
Yeah, and another thing that I'd like to mention too, I've always been obsessed with, cryptozoology, the supernatural and paranormal. So, just seeing something like that and then having nothing to go off was very weird. Do you remember that one website, American Monsters?
Yeah, I love that website. Yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of that, I actually met the people that ran that website. I bumped it. I was skateboarding in a Blockbuster parking lot, and I saw the hairy hominid sticker on a Jeep, and I walked over, and it was actually those guys that ran the website.
Oh, wow. I mean, those are like OGs of the cryptid world,
Yeah, such a weird coincidence. I was like, wow, I was like, I never meet other fans of stuff like this. And I went, and it was them.
That's crazy. Do you have any theories or guesses or anything about, I mean, obviously it's some kind of giant flying insect. Any ideas?
Honestly, like nothing. The closest thing I could think of was just some type of, the moth that time forgot or something.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Some kind of prehistoric moth or whatever. I mean, there's those, stories of Montauk out there. Maybe it came from there.
Like joking around, for the last like decade, we've joked around and we've always called it the mega moth.
Yeah, that's crazy, man.
And then, so other people were like, oh, Mothra. So, that's it. I looked in a couple books and the websites. I checked all the surrounding states for the largest moths, and not only were they not even the same color, but they were what you'd expect when you'd see a giant moth. They were like, almost as flat as a piece of paper.
Yeah. Yeah. They're kind of designed to hide against tree bark and stuff and flatten themselves out against it and blend in.
And you know what? Even though this one was rounded and had more of a shape of like one of those fuzzy bumblebees, the color he was, I mean, I'm telling you right now, if he like landed on a tree and didn't move, you'd never see him.
Huh. What condition was the cornfield in at the time? You said this happened around October.
I want to say that the cornfield had been cut. It had already all been cut. So another thing we had talked about once was and these guys, they're very thorough about their work. Did the, nonstop noise of these giant tractors like disturb this thing? But then at the same time, they do it at the same time every year,
Yeah.
So why would this one year, happen to wake this thing up or make it angry to where it would come out?
And, insects go through different stages. They have like a larval stage and stuff. So like, if you're talking about like a moth type insect, was it at one time a giant caterpillar or something? Maybe somebody has seen something else out there that could have been this in a different stage of life, and maybe that's why nobody else has described what you're talking about. But I mean, like, I'm just racking my brain, man. Like, I don't get stumped on cryptids very often. And not very often do I run across somebody that describes seeing something that I've never heard anybody else talk about.
Another thing, now that you bring that up, another regret that I'm having now is, besides, trying to close the garage door and capturing it, I should have, it wasn't my property, but I pretty sure I could have got away with going down there. I should have went down there like with a strong flashlight, and I should have looked to see if there was any type of like shell, that it came out of, or any odd holes in the ground or anything. But like I said, I was 22. I was not the person I am now, that's for sure.
I mean, there's no telling where it came from either. So you probably wouldn't have found anything. But yeah, I know what you mean. Especially now that you're sitting here 15 years later, still talking about it and still nowhere closer to figuring out what it was than the night you saw it.
Yeah. And if I called up, like right now, if I called up my buddy that was in the garage with me when it happened, I'd just say, hey, remember, Megamoth? And he'd laugh and he'd be like, yeah, damn right I do.
I mean, have you talked to those guys about it over the years?
Me and my friend Steve, yeah, we've talked about it a couple times. And then my one friend Dustin, who pulled in, I believe we've at least talked about it once or twice. Not recently, but yeah, definitely.
Your friend's mother and this guy Dustin both, whenever they saw it flapping around inside your garage, immediately associate it with being some sort of bird.
Yeah.
I mean, that tells you, the size of the thing was way too big to be a bug.
Yeah. Well, she said, when my friend Dustin played, he said, hey, you got some kind of weird bird flying around, because he was like flying around the middle of the garage, so I could see him in the headlights and I could see his shadow on the back of the wall too. So I could tell he was a solid, like, chunky dude.
And then, like, I assume the next day it was just gone.
Yes.
That's crazy, man. I wonder if anybody else saw it. And anybody that's listening, if you've seen a giant insect like this, hit me up and tell me. I'd love to hear about it, because this is something, I don't know, this is something that like cryptozoologists get really excited about, because while you're describing something completely out of the ordinary and much too large to be anything that we know about, you're also describing something that's like totally feasible.
Yeah.
And could very well be a real species and not just some folklore,
Yeah, because it's not like its eyes were glowing red and, shooting lasers, and he acted very much like an insect would act. He got into the lights, didn't know what to do, and bumped his head a bunch of times.
Well, have you experienced anything else in your lifetime? Any paranormal events or UFOs or anything?
No, nothing.
Just the giant attack of the moth.
Yep, nothing with, Bigfoot's always been my favorite cryptid. When I was younger, my favorite cryptids were always the lake monsters, but as I got older, I shifted to Bigfoot, but I've never had any, UFO or like paranormal ghost experiences or anything like that.
Where do you think your interest in this stuff came from?
When I was a young boy I was in second grade when X-Files started coming on TV.
Yeah.
And my mother, so I would watch the X-Files with my mother, like right when it, we watched every episode as they aired. Same thing with the Robert Stack Unsolved Mysteries. We watched all of those. So I loved all those, the ghost ones. And I know they didn't do much with Bigfoot, but there were a couple of them.
Yeah.
And then, was it Tim White with Sightings?
Yeah. Yeah.
I loved Sightings.
Sightings was a great show, man. That's a show that doesn't get enough recognition. It kind of gets overshadowed by like Unsolved Mysteries, but Sightings is
way better in my opinion for that type of stuff. I loved it. You are always, Unsolved Mysteries was kind of a gamble because I'd watch it regardless, but you knew something good was going to be on Sightings.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. They always had great stuff.
Yeah. And then when and then it was obviously years and years later when Monster Quest started, I was like, wow, I can't believe, the stuff's popular to this point to where there's going to be multiple seasons of a show like this.
Yeah, and it's only gotten more popular over the years. Now it's kind of its own thing. It's become part of pop culture and gotten trendy in some ways. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, all right, man. I appreciate you sharing your story.
Thank you for listening.
I wish I wish I had some information to give you or help you out with on this one, man. I'm sure it's really sucked, you know.
Yeah, I've been waiting to tell this one for quite a while. I've only told, like my wife and a couple of my close friends, and I told the kids, and that's pretty much it.
Didn't you say you reached out to Ken Gerhardt?
Yes, I did.
I just know he deals with a lot of weird stuff, you know.
I read Ken's book, Flying Humanoids, in 2015. And so September 30th, 2015, I wanted to tell him about it. And, this was probably my fault that I never got to speak with him, because he did ask what would be a good time to call tomorrow. And I don't remember what was happening in my life or what was going on. And I just never messaged him back. So that was actually on my end.
Hey, it happens.
Yeah, and maybe this was for the better, because I'm glad I listen to your show every time you guys put out a new episode. So maybe this will be for the better.
Yeah, man. I appreciate you coming on for sure. I'm going to be thinking about this one for the rest of the day, at least.
Yeah, if you ever hear anything from anyone, make sure you let me know.
Yeah, for sure. And if you've seen a giant moth, Bigfoot, or a lake monster, or anything at all that you can't explain, send me an email at bigfootcrossroads@gmail.com. Check out the website, bigfootcrossroads.com. You can find links to old episodes, a contact form, everything you need, all in one place. And until next time, remember, there's something in the woods.